Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the course of 14th century to 18th century poetry. This lecture is a continuation of the last lecture and we are studying Allegory in the book 1 of the Faerie Queen. I am your teacher Muhammad Asif Khan, lecturer, Department of English, Kohat University of Science and Technology. Discussion agenda of this lecture is very much similar to the last lecture, and first of all I will introduce the Faerie Queen as an allegory, and then I will review the concepts which we studied in the last lecture. After that we will continue the allegorical study of the characters and events of the Faerie Queen, and we will study that part of book 1 which we didn't covered in the last lecture. So Faerie Queen is basically an allegorical epic, and it has deep meanings behind its characters, places and events. So basically these deep meanings convey a broader message about the real world issues and the happenings. So basically Faerie Queen is having more than those simple meanings, and these meanings are having the profound study of the real world issues. So dear students, in the last lecture we discussed about the allegorical meanings of the characters and the events of the Faerie Queen. We saw that the Faerie Queen represents Queen Elizabeth and the fancy fairyland where these all events are happening. It symbolizes England, and the Knight of Red Cross, who is the hero of that very book, is basically the embodiment of holiness, and that knight represents an individual Christian on the search of holiness. The shield which that knight is wearing also has symbolic meanings, and we see that there is a bloody red color cross that represents the faith in the Holy Christ. In the same way, the main female character of this very story is Lady Una, and Lady Una represents truth. Her parents, who are captivated by a dragon, represents humanity, and that dragon who captivated Una's parents represent the great evil. So holiness is seeking to champion the cause of truth, and for that first of all holiness has to gain its own perfection, and it encounters a monster like error which is residing in the cave of error that represents human heart. Though holiness overcomes this very error in the very beginning, but we see that there are attempts of the evildoers to separate this holiness from the truth. And the first very attempt is being carried by hypocrisy, that is represented in the character of Archimago, and we see that this hypocrisy is the greatest enemy of the holiness and truth. Once these two companions, the holiness and truth, are separated, we see that holiness is exposed to falsehood, and it has to encounter faithlessness in the shape of Sensfoy, who is the pagan knight. And we see that this pagan knight was accompanied by falsehood, and that is represented in the figure or character of Duessa. Holiness gains success over faithlessness, but we see that it falls an easy victim to the charms of falsehood, and falsehood is represented by Duessa. So this character Duessa falsely names herself as Fidessa, that means faithfulness. So we see that holiness is very easily deceived by falsehoods, and he takes it as a faithfulness, and now holiness is in the company of falsehood. On the other side, we see that truth is separated from holiness. It also meets with same kind of misfortunes, though initially it is supported by a lion which represents the natural reason of the man and the primitive courage of untutored man that helps truth to subdue the blind devotion and abjectness and monasticism that are basically represented in the characters of Korska, Abessa, and Kirkepine. But we see that deprived of the support of holiness, it can't long stand on its own legs. And truth is also deceived by hypocrisy. And hypocrisy undertakes to be the champion of truth. But it can't stand in front of lawlessness that is represented by sense law. And this lawlessness easily snatches truth from the hypocrisy. So, dear students, in this way we see that truth that is being represented by Lady Una falls in the hands of sense law, that is the manifestation of lawlessness. On the other side, we see that falsehood leads holiness towards the house of pride that is being reigned by Lucifer. And here, holiness encounters the 7 deadly sins. He is also being challenged by sense joy, who is actually the embodiment of joylessness or anxiety. Though holiness overcomes joylessness, but here we see that it has to put great labor to overcome this joylessness. Therefore, we see that holiness without truth and in association with the falsehood is easily subject to the temptations of pride and other evils. So that is the summary of the main concepts which we studied in the last lecture. Now let's move towards the part which we are going to study today. As we see that in the contest with joylessness, holiness gained victory, but this is not the absolute victory, as we saw in the case of its fight with error. And the reason is that falsehood that is being depicted in the character of Duessa comes to a rescue of that evil, and it tries to keep it alive. And we see that this falsehood is also pursuing holiness with a very continuous and constant zeal, always trying to keep the holiness in the state of despondency, or we can also say that this falsehood tries to keep holiness in the state of hopelessness, mercy, and depression. Though holiness is deprived of the guiding hand of truth, yet there are other elements for the help of holiness, like we see that it is being aided by the prudence or common sense that is being embodied in the character of dwarf that accompanies the Knight of the Red Cross from the very beginning. So we see that it is the prudence that warns holiness against the danger that waits in the neighborhood of pride. And secondly, it is the prudence that saves holiness from the danger and risk that encompasses it while it has the company of falsehood, and when it lives in the neighborhood of the pride and other vices. Here we see that holiness takes the warning of the prudence and tries to escape from their trap. On the other side, we see that truth, having fallen into the hands of lawlessness, stands in a great danger of violation of its honor. But here, the untaught instinct of the savage mind, or the forces of the nature, comes to rescue and help in the release or liberation of the truth. In this instinct, or the force of nature, is represented by satyrs and fawns of the forest, at whose sight we see that lawlessness shrinks in fear, and that lawlessness flies away for its life. The wood gods although they live in the forest, watch over nature, and are instinctively kind to Una. And these very wood gods are not the representation of pure, violent, or brutish nature that is being represented by the lion. It is a bit different from that, because these very creatures are from the Greek and Roman mythology. They worship Una like an idol, and they represent that primitive beliefs of the ancients. They bow down to the Una, but do not realize the Christian truth that Una represents. And here we see that Spencer dismisses the gods of the Greeks and the Romans, because they are bowing in front of the Christian truth. This very event also demonstrates that the instinct of uncivilized primitive man has a great power over the lawlessness of that cruel pagan, whose soul has been changed to the wickedness by the false teaching based on false religion. And sometimes we see that because of the political conditions of that very time period of the Spencer, this false religion is represented by the Catholic Church, because there was a great controversy between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, and the Anglicans or the people of the British Empire were the followers of the Protestant Church or the Anglican Church, and they believe the Catholic Church as the representation of the false religion. So here Spencer wants to tell us that the untrained instinct of man is better able to recognize truth. And we see when they bow in front of Una, they offer its homage to the truth, the Christian truth, and it is far better than the intellect of the sophisticated person. So Lady Una's adoration by the satyrs and fawns of the unsophisticated simple man, whose mind has neither been trained to virtue nor corrupted by the evil and cruel influences of civilization, that is again an allegorical representation. Here another character comes to us, that is Sir Saturn, because he is part wood god and part human being. So we see that he still has the goodness of nature, and this very person can help Una. However, he does not represent anything Christian, and therefore we see that he cannot defeat Sensloi. Spencer repeatedly maintains that very concept that nature's best cannot perform the deeds that a Christian warrior can accomplish. So these deeds must be performed by a Red Cross who has been weakened by his visit to the House of Pride. The other thing is that truth cannot abide with or it cannot stand or live with such an untaught instinct for a long time, because instinct is impulsive and it is always susceptible to build devotion, which is again disgusting to the truth. We always see that when you look at the instincts of the human beings, these very instincts are very much reckless, and we are doing it spontaneously and always doing these things in haste. So it develops blind devotion, and that is very much distasteful to the truth. We see that instinct, untaught instinct, can help or defend or support the honor of truth for some time, as the natural heroism represented by Sir Saturn defended Una for some time. But natural heroism is not sufficient to protect it against the attack of lawlessness, as we see in the doubtful conflict between Sir Saturn and Sensloi. There is a continuous fight and unending fight between them, and Sir Saturn is not able to overcome the Sensloi, and we see Lady Una flees from that very event. On the other side, hypocrisy is stubborn, that in spite of its defeat and exposure at the hands of absolute lawlessness, even then it chases truth. It follows after truth, always trying to lead it off the track and off the target. And it tries to astray the truth from its quest of holiness. Just as we see that truth is being followed by hypocrisy, so is holiness that is constantly being persuaded by the double dealing falsehood. That double dealing falsehood actually owes its true alliance to sin and joylessness, but it tries to profess its love for holiness. So, in this sense, it is double dealing falsehood, because at the same time it is having a relation or alliance with the sin and joylessness, and also it shows its love for the holiness. So we see that Duessa's artful double dealing with sense joy on the one hand and the Knight of the Red Cross on the other hand exemplifies this very action of falsehood. So holiness may try to fly away from the falsehood, but falsehood would never leave it easily. It must pursue holiness to bring it to complete ruins. We see that holiness in its encounter with pride, falsehood and joylessness cannot escape the pollution of sins. And we see that in the result there is innovation of its power, and there is the weakness of its power. Falsehood overtakes holiness once again, and holding it in its trap delivers holiness into the hands of dreadful, terrifying, carnal and sensual pride. That very carnal and sensual pride is being represented by Orgoglio. So, without saving the grace of truth, holiness falls an easy victim into the hands of carnal pride that makes it its slave. This is what may be learned from the humiliating defeat of the Knight of Red Cross at the hands of Orgoglio, the joint which represents the godless pride, which can overcome the weak Christian who is still separated from the truth. After defeating him, pride throws him in the dark dungeon. This is what happened to the holiness when it transfers its affection from the truth to the falsehood. As I told you earlier, that holiness may give up truth, but truth will never remain satisfied without holiness. It will always pursue holiness, and this search may continue to the edge of doom. It will try to release holiness from the bonds of sin and carnal pride. This is what may be learned from the Lady Una's constant search for the Knight of Red Cross. Through 100 troubles, we see her final success in getting from the dwarf the news of the captivity of the Knight of Red Cross, that is embodiment of holiness. And here we see that she undertakes with Prince Arthur, whom she meets by mere chance or by divine mercy, to help to rescue the holiness from the dungeon of Orgoglio. So in other way, she is asking Prince Arthur to help truth to rescue holiness from the dungeon of or from the jail of the carnal pride. Arthur here becomes identifiable as a Christ figure because he helps Red Cross rise from the lowest state. This very allegory of the Faerie Queen is not that simple, However, later Red Cross himself will be linked to the Christ. In the last scene of the book 1, we see that Red Cross is himself very much linked to the Christ. However, King Arthur has more diverse meanings within the Faerie Queene. On the first level, we see that he is the hero of the whole poem of the Faerie Queene, and Spenser basically tries to have him appear briefly in each book, usually to save the day when things look hopeless. Arthur arrives and he saves each and every knight of these 6 books. So Arthur represents magnificence, and magnificence means the sum total of all virtues, and these virtues in their most perfect form, and this magnificence comes in the end to rescue holiness. Prince Arthur, or magnificence, attacks carnal pride in its firm stronghold, destroy or demolish it completely, and liberate holiness from its captivity. So this is what Spenser meant by this allegory of Prince Arthur's fight with Orgoglio and the prince's victory over the giant. So magnificence or magnanimity, that is courage, nobility, or unselfishness, now once again unites holiness to truth. King Arthur unites the Knight of Red Cross to Lady Una, and allegorically magnificence unites holiness to the truth that had long remained separated from each other through the scheming or plotting of hypocrisy. So holiness, though rescued from the grasp or from the trap of the carnal pride, but it has been much contaminated by its contact with them. Now it is impure and polluted. For that reason, it sinks into the state of despair. This holiness is desiring to put an end to its own existence. This event is being represented in the literal romance of Faerie Queene, when we see that the Knight of Red Cross enters the cave of despair and it tries to take its own life. So because of that impurity and pollution that resulted in contact with the carnal pride and other evils, results into the creation of a state of despair in the mind of the Knight of Holiness, and he is desiring to put an end to its own existence. But truth now once again saves it from such a rash action, and we see that first, though we must deal with despair, we saw earlier that the lion could not conquer despair in the form of sense joy. Here it is in the purest form, and it almost defeated Red Cross, except that he has truth, Una, and truth of God's mercy is greater than despair. This is one of the lessons that Red Cross learns in the House of Holiness, which is an exact counterpart of the House of Pride. So in the House of Holiness, where Una brings this weakened Red Cross, in this House of Holiness, instead of Lucifera, there is Kalia, that is heavenly grace. And on the other side, we see that instead of prayer of vices or sins, there is a large number of virtues here. The 3 daughters of Kalia, named as Fidelia, Speranza, and Carissa, they represents faith, hope, and charity. And these 3 are the greatest virtues, and each of these virtues instruct Red Cross in her own speciality. We also have 7 physicians who attend to his body, and these very 7 physicians are the counterpart to the 7 deadly vices of the House of the Pride. However, they do not all correspond to specific vices. They are not corresponded here, but we see that there in the House of Pride there were 7 deadly sins, and here in the House of Holiness there are 7 physicians who are treating the Knight of Red Cross. Divine mercy then aided the holiness, and through the process of contemplation, Knight of Holiness have a vision of heavenly bliss. So holiness is now almost, though not yet quite sufficient to meet Satan, the Antichrist, and the great evil represented by the dragon that held Una's parents in captivity, but he is to some extent ready to meet that great evil. Because we see that for a complete victory, holiness yet need the aid of Christ, represented by the trees of life in that marshy area where the night falls, and it also being helped by the gospel represented by the well of life. So with their aid, we see holiness gains in the end victory over the devil, which is the great sin of mankind. The knight also portrays Christ figure because he falls and triumphs on the third day. The same happened with Jesus Christ, and here we see the knight is also portrayed as Christ because he falls and triumphs on the third day. Just as Christ had to descend to hell to defeat it, Red Cross had to enter the hellish mouth of the dragon to finally kill it. We see how he killed the dragon. He entered the hellish mouth of the dragon to kill it. In the same way, Christ had to descend to hell to defeat the great evil. So holiness thus liberates mankind, represented by Una's parents, from the captivity of the great evil. It is then united to the truth. And now we see that this very holiness is united to the truth, with which it has in course of time to rule over the earth, freed from evils and sins. But hypocrisy and falsehood may try in vain to disrupt or destroy their unity. Tied in the bond of pure love, holiness and truth may rule over the spirit of mankind in eternity. The final battle between that Red Cross and the dragon brings the allegory of the entire book to a climax, and it encompasses all the different levels of religious and political meanings that Spencer has put into the story. Red Cross victory represents three distinct events. The first one is the Christ victory over the death and the devil in the crucifixion and resurrection. The second is the triumph of the individual Christian over the temptations of the sin. And the last one, which is very much political meaning of this allegory, and I haven't explained this concept very much in this lecture, but this is one of the message which Spencer has conveyed in this very epic, is that Red Cross's victory represents the defeat of Roman Catholic Church by the Church of England and all the Protestantism. So this is the story of the Faerie Queen, and we have studied that how allegorical meanings of the characters of the Faerie Queen and how the allegorical meanings of the events convey the broader message about the real world issues and happenings. So thank you very much for listening passionately. I hope that now you will be clear about the allegory in book 1 of the Faerie Queen. Allah Hafiz.